Thank you, panelists. And we're going to transition now to a new concept. And as we transition, if people have questions, we can certainly identify them, but I'm going to ask the Corridor of Commerce panel to please come up. We'll start that here in a minute, but any questions of the panelists that were here today? Okay. Come on up. We've got something new to introduce today. As our community transitions to the next phase of growth and innovation, there's a lot of new energy, new ideas, many based on the existing assets that are prospering right in front of us, many for decades. It's my pleasure to introduce 1NKY board member Amy Spiller, President and CEO of Duke Energy, who will moderate this high-powered panel consisting of Chad Summey from eGateway, Kevin Canifax of Fidelity, and Lee Kroom of BNKY. Our topic, the Corridor of Commerce meets community strategy.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon. We are here today to introduce a new phase of community strategy that focuses on our existing assets through policy and infrastructure development. Many of the assets for economic transformation are already present in our region, and Northern Kentucky is poised to claim a leadership position on several fronts: geography, thriving industries, a regional population that enjoys the benefits of a border state. All of these are the ingredients for a successful narrative. As part of this panel, we're going to introduce for you today a new thought on the community strategy front. Coined the Corridor of Commerce, this represents a regional strategy that can drive our entire region forward with Northern Kentucky in the lead. In concert with the work at BNKY, now under development, our community is ready to take the steps forward toward a thriving future. So we're going to start with Chad. Chad, why this focus on existing assets through policy and infrastructure with CVG at the core, and what do we need to do to be successful?
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everybody. What a fun crowd. Honored to be here, honored to bring this concept to life. Hopefully you walk away with a little bit better understanding of what we're considering the Corridor of Commerce. For those that I haven't met, Chad Summey, managing partner over at eGateway Capital. We're a relatively new firm in town. We're headquartered down in Covington. We're a growth capital firm that's investing and focused around a sector of the economy around the future of digital commerce. So what that means is eGateway makes investments in technology companies that we feel are empowering that future of commerce to occur. So we think of everything of how things are produced and procured, to how things are marketed, to how they're sold in the future economy, all the way to how they're distributed and delivered. So really a nexus of supply chain, CPG, consumer product goods, and retail. Why I bring that to life is the Corridor of concept really came as we have been around the country raising money. The first question I often get asked on the coast is they've never heard of a private capital firm in Covington, Kentucky. So there has to be a lot of background and context provided on why we're so excited to be housed here in Northern Kentucky. And a lot of that reason is we believe that our thesis, what we're focused on, is directly connected to what all of you in this room are quite familiar with, which is what Bill was referring to, 200 years of history of our region that started with the movement of goods, why they settled on the river. And we believe that history continues today. So at its core, when we bring to life this concept, the Corridor of Commerce is nothing more than hearkening back to our history and all the strategic benefits and the geographic superiority of why so many important assets have settled in our region. Namely, the three assets that I would put at the center of this, but they're definitely not exclusive, is Procter & Gamble, the biggest consumer products good company in the world, Kroger, the biggest standalone grocer, soon to be in the US, and then most notably here in Northern Kentucky, what I would say is the most important asset in the entire region, CVG. I've had the luxury of being on the CVG board for the last decade, and as you all know, Candace and her team have just done a phenomenal job. I wish Candace wasn't able to join us today, so I'll speak on her behalf too, that the airport just continues to set itself apart from, with a strategic plan as the fastest growing cargo airport in the country. And actually, some of you may not know, but the only airport in the country that's distinguished with two major cargo hubs of DHL and Amazon. And then you can, of course, drive 100 miles south and have the hub for UPS. So within 100 miles, you have 3 of the top 4 physical assets around the movement of goods. And then another 350 miles, you meet Memphis, which is the #1 cargo airport in the country with FedEx headquarters. So stepping back, we're really excited to bring, I have a white paper on this, so I won't bore you to bring this concept to life, but really it's around our history. It's around our assets. It's not so much what it is, because I think everybody knows in the room the story that I'm sharing here. We're just putting a narrative to it. It's more about what we do with this opportunity. That's what we want to discuss today. And the last thing I would say is we feel very excited that, I'll use a term often and I'll bring it to life, where the math has been done by others. What do I mean by that? Well, Amazon chose us. They did math similar to DHL, and on the other side of that equation, the equal sign, it said Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati region. They chose us. And we think, unlike, maybe this is a generational opportunity that most of us have never seen in this room come along, where the math is advantageous to us. So then the question becomes, what are those variables, and what are we doing about those variables on the left side of the equation over the coming decades to build more strength around those variables, but also add to them? So that's the concept of the Corridor of Commerce. I'm looking forward to answering any questions, but we're excited to be here today.
Great, thank you, Chad. Lee, BNKY is charged with leading the economic development strategy for Boone, Campbell, and Kenton counties, as well as working with the greater region. Your group recently started discussions on the community strategy front. How does the Corridor of Commerce concept fit into that overall strategy?
Well, thank you for the question. So let me give a little background on the strategy that we're working on. Ultimately, I'm going to get to the answer, which will be something like open-minded and not sure, because we're developing the strategy. We don't know the answer before we ask the important questions, but I'll get you to that. So really, thanks to Brent Cooper and the Chamber and some work they did earlier this spring, it became apparent to us that we really needed to identify what are the big challenges and risks that this community is facing in the next couple of years, and we've launched a program to try to identify what those are. A key element of that is this fall, our organization has identified 70 companies in the community that we think really make up a great cross-section of our economy. We're so smart, we called it the strategic base companies of the economy. And we're going out and meeting with each one of those this fall. And I can tell you, thus far, we've had 4 meetings, and all 4 of those meetings talked about the importance of where we physically sit in the United States or in North America and how important it is. So I really think this idea, and whether it's Bill or whether it's Chad talking about 200 years of history or whatnot, that where we are and where we sit is an incredibly important driver for companies making decisions to locate here, the success that we've had and the success that we will have. I also think what's really interesting about this is the investments in infrastructure. That to me is an element that drives every other piece of our economy, whether it's how do we grow our population, how do we draw workforce from other parts of the state, how do we draw workforce from other parts of our community to where the job centers are. Investments in an infrastructure in a really thoughtful way are going to be incredibly, incredibly important. And what I really love about this strategy thus far, to what I understand about it, and having read the white paper, I didn't think it was boring. I thought you did a great job of that. And my attention span, my staff will tell you, is about that of a fruit fly. So, about half of the industry sectors that we work on, we did a study 2 years ago with E&Y, and we identified 4 big clusters. This directly impacts at least half of those. Logistics logistics and technology around that directly, manufacturing directly, and then there's even inputs for IT and life sciences. And so what I really am excited about and see is how do we take this and expand upon it, make sure that it includes other critical parts of our economy in the life sciences realm, in the information technology realm, and then also how do we make sure we tie it in. Julie will talk in a little bit about the acronym RUI, which is just fantastic. Yeah, that makes my campaign name sound really innovative. But the regional umbrella identity. So how do we make sure those things are working together? So long story short, we don't know the full answer because we're still asking the questions, but really excited about the concept and where this could go.
Great, thank you, Lee. And Kevin, not only are you a leader at Fidelity Investments, but you're also the founder of entrepreneurial endeavors such as Brandemonium. I'd really ask you to share with us today what you think is next for us in Northern Kentucky with respect to this concept.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for the kind introduction. First off, the axiom in real estate is location, location, location. I think Chad and Lee have addressed that pretty clearly, and there's no question that our geographic location is a tremendous asset, and we all recognize that. One little side fact relative to Fidelity that I don't believe most people in the room are aware of. So we employ 5,400 people. We've been here since 1994 when we officially opened our campus. Do you know the reason why we came here? The geographic location. We merged our print and mail operations in 1994 from Massachusetts and Texas to Covington, simply because of the proximity to the airport and, again, the geographic location strategically. This campus, out of 11 regional centers nationally for Fidelity, interacts on a daily basis with 70% of our customer base. Let me repeat that. 70% of our customer base is touched by our employees here in Covington, Kentucky. So while we're not commerce per se and financial services, it's still very relevant as to why our chairman at the time, Mr. Johnson, had the foresight to recognize the geographic advantages of having a regional center operation here. In terms of any entrepreneurial endeavors that I've embarked upon, principally Brandemonium, we had a nice 5-year run. Brandemonium was, like many other major events, quelled by the pandemic. But when we came up with the idea, I think many of you are aware that branding was born here in Cincinnati at Procter & Gamble. And it was a rallying cry that is exactly in line with what we're talking about here with the Commerce Corridor. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the right to win this. This is not something out of whole cloth that we're trying to manufacture or recreate or say, well, if we get this and we bring in this and we modify that, we can be competitive. It's all here. It is all here. So when Chad came up with this really very inspiring, brilliant idea, I was fully on board because there were a lot of parallels for me to the whole idea and concept around Brandemonium. Bring the world of branding to Cincinnati where it was born. Bring the world to Cincinnati or greater Cincinnati because this is where all of the major players and influencers are. Well, you've already heard it referenced. We have Amazon, 800 acres, 2,000 employees, $1.5 billion in investment. They could have chosen to go anywhere in the world, not the United States, the world, and they came here. And the cargo impact that Chad referenced, I've been on the airport board since 2012, is nothing short of incredible. And the impact that we're having in that space is really a multiplier effect that's beyond comprehension, frankly. Every day we have our board meeting, or every month, and we get the numbers on the cargo, and just exponentially, they just keep increasing. So the opportunity is there, the assets are there, we have the right to own this. And what I thought about immediately, Bob was talking earlier about the power of bourbon. We were all having a few bourbons down at Hotel Covington, Joe and Bob and Karen and myself and Greg. And it just struck me that what's a way to connect and catalyze this awesome vision, this very realistic, doable vision? It's to have a commerce summit. So I'm someone that's very visual, so I think about what's the headline or what's the potential of connecting and catalyzing an idea like this. The thought was, why not have a commerce summit here where we bring in, by the way, let me preface by saying we have very clear directives. The plan is fully baked, not fully baked, partially baked, and I'll address that in a moment, where we address all the assets, we get all the players in this room on board, fully behind the opportunity, and then we bring in Jeff Bezos. We bring in John Pearson from DHL. And we bring them here with Covington, CVG being the hub for a multi-state commerce corridor conversation about not only the assets that we have today, but the future. What do we need to do to amplify and catalyze that to a greater degree? And let them be part of the solution as part of the dialogue and the exchange. So very much like Brandemonium, when we brought all these branding and marketing experts from all over the United States into Cincinnati, it's the same thing here. We bring in all the commerce, corridor, supply chain experts, the greatest, brightest minds in the country, even the world, convene here. And it's so interesting because I think all of these things are interconnected in a way that sometimes defies explanation. Just last week, I was in Indianapolis, and I was in the company of Governor Bill Lee from Tennessee. And I sent this text to Chad and Karen and Candace and a few others. And he sat on a panel, and he said, quote, because Memphis' home was already mentioned, FedEx. He said, states need to work more closely together on this commerce, on these commerce opportunities. And I was like, bingo, because we could host this and we could work in tandem with Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee. But we're the center of the hub. We're the heartbeat of this opportunity and this vision. So let's rally around this. Let's fully embrace it and look at what I think is just incredible, unlimited potential to take this to another level. And I'll wrap it up by saying, because we have the right to own this, we have the assets, it's all here. It's just a matter of putting it all together.
So Kevin, really inspiring. And Chad, we'll look to you for maybe some final thoughts on timing. I feel that this is really important, and how do we keep the excitement and almost a sense of urgency as part of the process?
Well, I'll just give you some disparate thoughts around what Kevin, just illustrated. One, we all have to digest the asset of the airport. And I think it's, I always give this statistic, the Northern Kentucky Alliance has heard it many times, but in 1950, Birmingham, Alabama, same size as Atlanta, Georgia. And the only choice economically between the two cities, by the way, if you were a betting person in 1950, you would have picked Birmingham, Alabama, because it was the head of U.S. Steel and a lot of big companies. The difference was Hartsfield International, and it became the capital of the South. We have the fastest growing cargo airport right here. It's the number one asset in the entire region, sitting in Northern Kentucky. So I guess my call to action would be a leadership position that maybe we've never been in, not just as part of our region, but part of the entire corridor of the Midwest. So just something to consider of the power of the asset. Second, I think, we had a unique opportunity to bring this concept to life to the governor. And, a conversation that I would share with all of you, because I think it applies, is we have to elevate our language. Supply chain logistics infers big box and trucks. And I think there's a lot of negative connotation around that. This is not that. Everything we're investing at eGateway, just as an example, is the technology that's changing the future economy that's going to be driven by commerce. And so as we think 2 decades forward, the economy is definitely going to look more digital. And we have a unique advantage to play a role in that. An advantage where supply chain in every company in the US, and I bet Amy and the other folks in the room can appreciate this, supply chain was always a bottom line exercise of CFOs. It has now become a top line exercise of every CEO in the country. So when you think of this, don't think big boxes and trucks. This is the entire value chain of commerce. So I'll give you a great Northern Kentucky example. 80 acres, one of our investments. Vertical farm, here it happens to be out of Hamilton. It's a great story scaling with Kroger, changing, transforming how food is produced. Huge supply chain ESG play, taking trucks off the road as Kroger considers putting food manufacturing right next to food distribution. The biggest, most advanced farm, one could argue, in the world, in this space, just opened up in Boone County, which is very exciting. But if you read it, you would think, or go by it, it's just another big building. But this fits beautifully. This isn't just 80 acres coming to Northern Kentucky. This is a story and a win on the corridor of commerce. So as we think about the narrative to connect so many things that are organically already happening with Lee and team's support, it just connects to something larger that's very intuitive to everybody else in the country. I would challenge us to think as big as we've ever been or thought, and I would also challenge, it's going to require a level of focus that our community's probably never achieved before. To have the first 100 miles of autonomous driving trucks, aspirational, should be on the corridor of commerce. It should be between Cincinnati and Louisville, first 100 miles. So I leave you guys with those type of thoughts. Again, if there is any interest to learn more about it, there's plenty, but we really appreciate all the support and continued discussion around the topic.
Gentlemen, thank you for your vision, for your leadership. We'll give this panel a round of applause and turn it back over to Karen.